Hello everyone. So we've looked at photosynthesis and we know the word equation, and today we're going to think, where exactly does photosynthesis take place? So to think about where it takes place, we need to think about what it needs. So if you think of the word equation, water plus carbon dioxide gives us glucose plus oxygen. So just a reminder that these are the substrates, a bit like the ingredients, but we call them substrates. And these are the products because they're produced. Now, of course, we also we need light. And quite often we might write chlorophyll on the arrow as well. So the light and the chlorophyll are not substrates or products because they're not actually chemicals. Well, the light isn't a chemical, it's a source of energy, and it's the energy that's needed to join the H2O with the CO2 to give us the glucose, C6H12O6, and oxygen. And this all happens in the chloroplasts. So that's sort of the first part of the answer. Where does photosynthesis take place? Well, we know that it takes place inside chloroplasts. And we've studied the structure of the leaf and we know what chloroplasts look like. When we looked at onion cells, we realised they didn't have any chloroplasts, and that was because there was no point, because the onion cells we looked at grow under the ground and there's no light there, so there'd be no point in those cells having chloroplasts. So they need chloroplasts, they need a source of carbon dioxide, and they need a source of water. So if we think of the plant, the water comes in through the roots, up through the stem and out to the leaves. The leaves are green, and that means they're packed full of chloroplasts. So the leaf is essentially where where most of the photosynthesis takes place. If the plant has a green stem, you get a bit of photosynthesis taking place there. So if we look at a leaf, the veins have vessels that carry water up from the stem out to the leaf. So the leaf has a good supply of water. And if we were to take a knife or a razor blade and cut across the leaf and look into it, sort of get down horizontally and look into it, the leaf would look like that, really, really flat and thin. The leaf has a large surface area, and that's because the light is coming from above. If you had a big, thick leaf, so if leaves were that thick, it's not going to work because the light is only going to penetrate the first few layers of cells. And so those cells there at the top, they're going to photosynthesize. These cells down here basically are a waste of space. They're not going to get any light. They're not going to be able to photosynthesize. And that's why leaves are very flat and thin. They have a large surface area to absorb as much light as possible, and they're very thin so that all the cells can get light. So this diagram of the leaf would actually look at this slide. We've talked about the water, and so we've talked about water, we've talked about light, we've talked about the chlorophyll inside the chloroplast. What about the carbon dioxide? Like this, if we were to cut through it, where this is the sunlight coming down from here. And so this is the top layer of the leaf. Now if we look at the leaf, we can see different tissue layers. You learnt in the last section that a tissue is a group of cells that are all basically the same, performing the same job. So if we were to draw a line there and there, we can see that we've got one layer of cells at the top here. Now, you've maybe heard of the word epidermis, and you've heard of that word in association with your skin. Your skin has a layer of epidermis. And so epidermis is like a lining tissue. So we've got the upper epidermis at the top here. And you've probably worked it out, we've got the lower epidermis at the bottom. The middle section is the mesophyll, but if we look closely, we can draw a line there, and this is called the palisade mesophyll, and this is called the spongy mesophyll. And obviously you can make the link. A sponge has lots of air spaces in it. This here, these are air spaces here. So the spongy mesophyll has lots of big air spaces. So on the right hand side here, we've labelled the tissue layer. So I'm just going to write that at the top. Tissues, or sometimes you're asked to label the layers. And we can label some of the other bits and pieces that we've got here. So I'm going to do them in a different colour. So we said this is an airspace. At the very top, now if I can rub this out, it's not working too well, but tell you what, the very top we've got a layer which is the waxy waterproof layer, and that's called the waxy cuticle. If we didn't have it, anytime it rained, your leaves would go all soggy. So the waxy cuticle is a waterproof layer. Underneath it we've got the upper epidermis. Now, if you look at the layer underneath, palisade mesophyll, we've got lots of these little circles here. These are actually chloroplasts. So you can see that there are lots of chloroplasts in this layer here. And there's quite a few, but not just as many, in the spongy mesophyll layer. And that's really good because the palisade mesophyll is going to get a lot more sunlight than the layer below it. So the sunlight can pass through the upper epidermis. If you look closely at it, you'll see it doesn't have any chloroplasts. So it's not green, it's transparent, it lets all of the light through. Now, so that's the light. We've talked about chlorophyll, it's inside the chloroplast. The palisade mesophyll has just been absolutely packed full of chloroplasts. The other substrate that it needs is water. Now we saw on the diagram of the leaf that there are veins, and the veins carry, well, they're basically like a big hollow tube that carry water up from the roots, up through the stem and out into the leaf. So you'll have one of those vessels called a xylem vessel carrying water, and the water then can pass through into the cell, so it can get through from cell to cell into the palisade mesophyll cells, because remember that is where most of the photosynthesis is taking place. So if we go back to the diagram of the leaf, carbon dioxide has to get into the leaf, and the only place it can do that is through these tiny little pores at the bottom here, okay? So these pores here are called stomata. That's the plural. The singular word is stoma. So stomata are tiny little pores, openings, mostly in the lower epidermis. There are very few of them on the upper epidermis. We generally don't include them in diagrams because there's so few of them. Most of them are in the lower epidermis. So what happens is that the carbon dioxide can get in here through there and can get up through the airspace and then gets into the surrounding cells and moves from cell to cell until it gets up into the palisade mesophyll cells. So I'm just going to jot down carbon dioxide and put an arrow going through there and up to there. So to summarise, On the right hand side of our diagram there, we've got 4 layers, or 4 tissue layers. So we've got the upper epidermis, which is transparent, the lower epidermis, which is the same, transparent. Both of those are covered in a waxy cuticle. So I haven't labelled it in the bottom, but if you look closely, there is another layer at the bottom, and that's another waxy cuticle that keeps the leaf waterproof and stops things leaking out or the water seeping in. So the upper epidermis is transparent to let as much light through as possible to the palisade mesophyll cells. This layer, packed full of chloroplasts, it's getting the most light because it's up near the top of the leaf. It's getting water from these vessels here that's going to just move in from cell to cell and move across to the cells that need it. It's getting carbon dioxide through the stromata. It diffuses up through the airspace and then eventually into the palisade mesophyll cells. So we've talked about water, carbon dioxide, sunlight, and chloroplasts. So that's how a leaf is adapted, and the structure of the leaf really helps fulfill photosynthesis. Most photosynthesis taking place in this layer here at the top. Okay, thank you.